Magari lo giro un po', giriamo un po'. Riesci a vederlo?
Sì, mi preoccupa più la posizione.
We're waiting for you to sit. Buongiorno a tutti. I hope you don't mind if I speak English. So, we are very happy to start officially our talk program today. As you might have visited already some exhibition of Exposed, or you read about it. Yesterday we opened the festival. The next month and a half is going to be plenty of events. And the talk program is one of our main events in the festival. We really care about discussing topics that start from the exhibition that we present and then go deeper. So we're very happy, and especially I'm very happy to start it welcoming this very important topic that is also pretty relevant, I would say, in the country we find ourselves in today. So I'm not going to say much. Today is going to be a very intense morning with a lot of food for thought, I would say. So welcome Alessandra Ferrini, Samudzi, Professoressa Cristina Giudice, and Nemi Ferrara. I leave you the stage, and thank you very much for being with us this morning.
Hello. Ok, funziona. Quindi io posso parlare invece in italiano, forse è più semplice, vedo un po' di studenti. Voi avete la traduzione? No, non so. I can speak in English? No, okay, I speak in English. Okay. So, but I don't say a lot of things. Thanks, welcome to everybody. I'm very happy to be here to host this festival in Accademia Albertina. And we say welcome to all the people and all our artists of this morning. And I want to introduce my colleague Nemi Ferrara. She will talk a little about the two artists that this morning are here with us to discuss about the title is A Fascist Historical Present, Unraveling Italy's Postcolonial Question. So it is something I think is very, very interesting, and I think it's very important to have to talk about this here in Torino, in Italy, in these days. Thanks.
Grazie Cristina. Allora, mi sentite? Perfetto. Allora, io farò una breve introduzione in italiano. C'è la traduttrice che ha già il testo, quindi loro sono coscienti del loro percorso e già lo andremo a restringere molto per lasciare la parola. Allora, è con grande piacere quindi che vi presento Alessandra Ferrini, che è una visual artist, residente a Londra, si occupa di filmmaking, installazioni, performance lecture e lavoro editoriale. Ha vinto il premio Maxi Bulgari 2022 a Roma e ha esposto a livello internazionale un po' in tante sedi importanti, in particolare all'ultima Biennale di Venezia, quella curata da Adriano Pedrosa. Anche a Torino, durante la pandemia, è stata coinvolta con alcuni progetti, soprattutto con la Fondazione San Ettore Baudenovo, quindi possiamo ricordare per esempio l'autoinstallazione al Parco del Valentino che si intitolava Tra due rive straniere. Inoltre è ricercatrice ed educatrice. Il suo lavoro si inserisce nel panorama metodologico postcoloniale e attinge anche a pratiche storiografiche e archivistiche e ai critical whiteness studies, nel tentativo di ridefinire la storia dell'Italia e del patrimonio italiano, mettendo in discussione quelle che sono le eredità del colonialismo italiano e del fascismo. In particolare cercando di intessere fra di loro passato e presente in una rete di relazioni tra Italia, la regione mediterranea e l'Africa. Invece Zoe Samudzi è sociologa, con un dottorato in sociologia medica presso l'Università della California di San Francisco e attualmente assistant professor presso lo Russell Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies della Clark University, Massachusetts, ricercatrice associata presso il Center for Study of Race, Gender and Class dell'Università di Johannesburg. La sua ricerca si è concentrata sull'imperialismo tedesco, sul genocidio di popolazioni come Ovairero e Nama, e soprattutto sull'eredità del colonialismo nell'Africa meridionale e anche in generale sulla colonialità che pervade tutto il continente africano. Samudzi è anche una critica d'arte, scrittrice, redattrice associata di Paraproxys Magazine e collabora anche con Jewish Carrots e ha ricevuto il Simon Rockover Award nel 2023 for Excellence in Arts dall'American Jewish Press Association per la sua recensione sulla retrospettiva di Philip Gaston. Lascio la parola quindi a loro, alle riflessioni che emergeranno sul postcolonialismo e sulla questione italiana anche e della Libia, a partire dal nuovo libro di Alessandra Ferrini, Like Swarming Maggots. A voi, grazie.
Grazie, thank you. Thanks everybody here who came this morning, ventured out in the heavy rain. And thanks to Expose and the organization. Thank you, Zoe, for inviting me to be in conversation with you here this morning. So when we organize, I'm going to speak a little bit, introduce my work a bit more in detail, and then Zoe is going to introduce her new research. And then we're going to talk a little bit around this book, Like Swarming Maggots, that I recently published, and involves a lot of people, not just me. I just start with this slide just to make sure that when we talk about Italian colonialism, we kind of have an idea of the places, the timings, and also the kind of reverberations of this period, sort of periodization, and how the colonialism structured the nation states and the formation of the nation state in Italy. So it is something that often in Italy we tend to think and associate in relation to fascism, but actually it's something that starts much, much earlier, and it does start with the constitution of the nation state, already with an imperial drive. So that's, for me, something of great importance, because when we're tracing also, when we're looking, for instance, a year that I'm obsessed with, which is 1911, which is when Italy is the 50th anniversary of Italian unification. It's also the year of the International Expo that was hosted here in Parco del Valentino. And there's, a very big rhetoric, like nationalist rhetoric around this moment. And also it's the year where Italy occupied Libya, at the time under Ottoman occupation. So, in this moment, to me, is always very clear how, what precedes it in terms of constitution of a national identity, which is, again, like based on an imperialist mindset. but also what follows, and by that I mean fascism. So all the seeds like proto-fascism are there when we're looking at the propaganda around the occupation of Libya, the weaponization of archaeology and and Romanity. We have several issues, and also it's a moment where genocidal action really starts. I'm thinking about the very beginning of the war in 1911, October 1911, and the event of Shah al-Shah, which is also an event which started the use of aerial bombing. So I think when we're looking at this moment, although it's kind of overlooked, 1911, just before the First World War, which obviously it's a huge event in history, but we already have all the roots. It's very clear to see the before and the after. And to me, it's very important also to understand this continuity and not to understand fascism as something that happens in a vacuum, as a sort of rupture. It's not a rupture, it's very much an acceleration of certain, culture or nationalist culture that is already there. And then, of course, we have after fascism. And fascism is a moment where the violence intensifies, and we have two genocides which we should be aware of and remember. One happened in Libya at the end of the 20s and beginning of 30s. The other one happened during the occupation of Ethiopia in the 1935-36. So these two moments are very important. They determining a lot of factors in the way Italy understands racial politics and relations, for instance, and then the colonies are mostly lost during Second World War. So after that, we have this Republican Italy, so the foundation of the Republic, which is founded on the Togliatti amnesty, which basically did not persecute the people responsible both for most of fascist crimes and violence, but also very much violence in the colonies. And so this impunity has given rise to a certain kind of condition and very much an erasure and a silencing around this violence and this legacy. And for me, I come from a family that actually quite oddly doesn't have a relation to the colonies. I thought it was the norm, but then I realized by doing this work that is not the norm. Most people have a relative that was in Libya or in Ethiopia especially, and so I was quite naive when I started working on this. I was almost 30, and I left Italy when I was a teenager, and I moved to London. And it's in London when I was almost 30 that I found out that Italy had colonies. And it was a shock because I lived with a person from Libya, and a lot of things where he was expecting me to know a lot of things and I didn't know anything. So that's sort of triggered all I've been doing in the past 15 years, really. And so just because I can talk a lot, is this working? Yeah, I just put a slide here before Nemi mentioned the work I presented at Venice Biennale. And yeah, I mean, I work a lot around thinking around what to do with these legacies and what does it mean to have a responsibility towards this legacy, even though, of course, yes, my grandfather was a partisan, of course, I could be here completely denying, but of course this is a legacy that invests all of Italian society. We've all been complicit, everybody's been complicit with fascism, with, of course, as white people, we've been ingrained with a certain way of thinking, which is deeply racist. And so a lot of what I do is to try and think about this legacy and how they affect the way I look at the world, but also the way I inhabit the world, and specifically how I inhabit the institutions that my work happen within. So, for instance, with Venice, for me, it was very important to think about, can this work create any friction? How do I create any friction. What does it mean for me to be here in this moment, political moment, with a project that looks at the relation between Italy and Libya, and specifically neo-colonial relations. And so although the project that I've worked on for a very long time looks at Berlusconi and Gaddafi, it was important to look at the present, look at Meloni, look at Piano Mattei, and this kind of, and update the work in this way. And last thing, and then I'm gonna shut up, is that the question, it's not just a question of institution, it's a question of audiences, right? And I feel like a lot of the time when we're making this work, the audiences that come along are already sort of thinking along, my political kind of standings. And then, of course, it can feel very, very useless, what we do, because it kind of always preaching to the choir in a way. But then what I realized was, I grew up in Florence, which is historically a city on the left, but also one of the most racist places you can encounter, where we had many racially motivated killings, for instance. And to me, that I'm very well versed within the hypocrisy of the center left and the left intellectuals, and the kind of, and so to me, that's my audience, and that I try to move within that, because it's very easy to demonize the far right. But I'm much more interested to look at the nuances and trying to understand how this imperialist and racist rhetoric is replicated within the left. And I will stop here.
So on the kind of topic of twinning coloniality and fascism is a new project that I have started. And it kind of begins at this strange convergence of images. The first image, I don't think anyone who is Italian is unfamiliar with this image, the capturing of Mussolini's infamous end. No longer the barrel-chested, sharp-suited fascist strongman, he's hung by his feet alongside his mistress and 3 other associates. Bloodied and stripped of his clothing, he more resembles meat in a butcher shop window than an imperial leader's undignified deposition. What are we to conclude about the kind of brutality that the partisans exercised in this moment? Is this the kind of end that's deserved by a leader? Do the monstrous partisans whose political violence know no bounds owe their leader some form of decorum and dignity in death? Did they enjoy the desecration in carefully unclothing and revealing these denuded bodies to the public? Is there some kind of theatric or performative aspect to a pleasure, I'm sure, that was taken in this moment? The second kind of image comes from Pasolini's infamous Salo, and the film, of course, takes place in the puppet state or the rump state of the Republic of Salo, which is the death knell of Mussolini's fascist empire. And in the final part of the film, in the circle of blood, the chaos of the rest of the movie really accelerates and comes to a head. Following the sacrilegious marriages between the wealthy libertines and the young virile men that they abducted, betrayal spreads through the ranks of the captives in hopes that their betrayals grant them grace and salvation. They all become collaborators. Through some betrayal, the most handsome of the studs, Ezio, is discovered in the throes of a sexual tryst with a young black woman. The incident of sex, not under the physical duress of the masters, is an act of miscegenation. And given the context of Italian colonialism, we can presume that this young black woman is Ethiopian or Eritrean. And of course, the actress, the slave girl, is portrayed by Ines Pellegrini, who is a Milan-born actress of Eritrean origin. When the young lovers are discovered, the maid cowers beside a wooden chair, but Ezio stands defiantly, raising his fist. His gesture is simultaneously linked to his undermining of the fascists' imposed sexual order and a collusion with blackness not immediately mediated by the fascist or imperial encounter. So why start here? We start here because the intertextuality of the fascist imaginary binds these two images together. The communist fucking the African is reconceptualized domestically within Italy as a manifestation of the chaos that decolonization brought and the upending of the European colonial order, including the very brief tenure of the Kingdom of Italy. The contagion of a pathological Black freedom is intimately related to the violent post-World War II left-wing destabilization inside of Italy. The genesis of this depravity would be realized through this animalistic assassination of Mussolini. Against the backdrop of the 2-decade anni di piombo, the back and forth volleying of incidents of political violence between left and right-wing actors between 68 and 88, are interrelated genres of film that act as a cinematic projection of racial and political anxiety. Italy is two things that most other European colonizers, save for Germany, are not. It's young. Its states only unified into a single kingdom in 1861. And it is an imperial country that failed to decolonize with any sense of closure or finality. Rather than transferring sovereignty to occupied native majorities or losing an armed struggle, it simply lost its colonies. And so thus we see a psychic and political disruption, the incompletion of an imperial severing and the simultaneous assimilation of former colonial subjects into the state, which is then interpolated into the political struggle to lead post-war Italy. So, the project then is about two genres of film that are, deeply interrelated and deeply disturbing: the Mondo film and the cannibal film. So Mondo films are the subgenre of pseudo-documentaries that offer a travelogue glimpse into the untamed third world. Africa and Blackness, however, become a popular subject of these films, with Africa Addio documenting the continental chaos of decolonial modernization, infant nationalism, and Black majoritarian statecraft. And in fact, Africa Addio accuses the Mau Mau fighters of cannibalism, which is an accessible and an incredibly common way that the English would demonize the legitimacy of this armed struggle in Kenya and in elsewhere. The subsequent cannibal boom, the cannibal genre, initiated by Umberto Lenzi's Man from Deep River, is a concentration of this racial civilizational othering through graphic depictions of Stone Age primitives in typically Pacific or South American rainforests engaging in stomach-turning and Christian sensibility-defying acts of torture, rape, and animal cruelty. Ruggero Deodato's Cannibal Holocaust was specifically inspired by the Italian media's coverage of the violence of the Red Brigades, a Marxist-Leninist group that was, among other things, responsible for the 1978 kidnapping and murder of Prime Minister Aldo Moro. Understanding the reportage of their acts of terror to be staged, his film utilizes documentary footage to punctuate the attested veracity of the image that is presented as factual. The violence of the cannibals bears shocking similarity to that of the partisans that strung Mussolini and his cadres up in Piazzale Loreto. And while the heavy-handed moral messaging of Cannibal Holocaust leaves viewers pondering whether the real monsters are the natives or the whites' fabricated colonial myths and actual acts of violence, we cannot help but look at the partisan treatment and wonder about its necessity. We of course know the Cold War-era motivations for anti-communism, and these tactics were not limited to the non-white world. The CIA, of course, was involved in supporting neo-fascist insurgencies and contributed to these false flag fabrications of left-wing violence. This produces not only an equivocatory condemnation of left and right-wing violence that completely obfuscates the origins of these violences and the disparate nature of the action, but it also conceives of left-wing violence as against civilization. Where fascism offered an allegedly conservative revolutionary stabilization of whiteness, and neo-fascism sought to carry forward Mussolini's structured and measured political project, left-wing violence was wanton, misdirected. It inhabits the same borderland space as the cannibal, where cannibalism then is the metaphor for consumption and a non-metaphoric description of eating others, and this is the border and designation of what constitutes civilization or barbarism. The cannibal's violence, besides repulsive, is ritualistic. It carefully cleaves the body into manageable and consumable pieces which are devoured and shared. The decolonial is the cannibal, methodically descending the Western world and capital into a disorder befitting only the primitive. The partisan leftist and the cinematic third world cannibal, then, are united in their casting as having a shared regressive psychological cultural disturbance. They're both animated by a thirst for blood, whose imagined origins lie in the interplay between Italian imperial nostalgia, a belief that Africans were better disposed to a future under imperial rule, amnesia, the Italian refusal to remember, and aphonia, a silence that is produced by the Italian inability and refusal to speak. Thank you.
Should we move on to the book? We don't have much time, so it's all a bit compressed. So,
Please.
Okay, so yeah, I recently published this book as my first monograph. It was published at the end of last year, 2024, with Archive Books, and thanks to a generous Italian Council grant. And it allowed me to, well, the Italian Council Fund is mostly for artists, Italian artists to showcase their work abroad. So it focuses very much on art practice, but I wasn't so interested in just publishing about my work, but I was more interested in creating a space for other people's practices to, to find a to be in conversation with my work, but also in conversation between them. And also something that really interests me a lot of the time is when it's possible is to think about reallocating budgets and, you know, specifically in acts of translation. Because there's a lack of scholarship and material, also primary sources being circulated or translated from the former colonies. Specifically, there's a very notable lack of scholarship and material from Libya. And so in this case, we have a translation by Adam Bencato of some original documents from the anti-colonial resistance in Libya against the Italians during the time of the genocide. And this material that hasn't been circulated much even in Arabic, it was resurfaced recently, and Adam translated into English. We are planning to also translate into Italian and make it accessible online. And the book has many people that contributed, Libyan practitioners specifically, and also just here you can have an idea of what the contents look like. It's structured between these shot and counter shots, so different voices, and three different parts looking at three different areas of work. One on positionality, one related more to sort of long processes and continuities, and the last one, it's more to do with genocide and how to think about genocide, and I mean how to work on that without necessarily recirculating violence imagery and just more in general how to think about working on this right now, specifically for my positionality.
One thing I'm interested in your work, which it's really useful to teach. I mean, when I teach about Italian colonization and to look at these relationships between Gaddafi and Berlusconi that are so, like, obvious, like anti-immigrant capture and protection of the Mediterranean using the same imaginary and conception that Mussolini imagined for the Mediterranean as they're trying to expand this new Roman Empire. I mean, I'm really interested in this idea of, can I go back? Where you talk about the ethical implications of cultural work. And particularly translation is a big part of this, but I mean, how do you kind of imagine, rather than the constant reactivity of the left to changing political circumstances, how do you kind of imagine like a positively articulated political project around memory, around this insistence to speak?
Okay. I mean, I tend to be not very optimistic or positive or hopeful. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like I'm quite isolated in my work in a way. Also the fact that I am distant because I don't live in Italy. I'm not obviously looking at Libya, but from an Italian positionality, and also from the UK. So I feel like also my work it's very clearly articulated through this distance, and so that's why a lot of the thinking I'm trying to do is to think about cultural work, because I feel very aware of my limitations, also in terms of, I'm not an activist in terms of, being here, being in the street. And so it's a place where I often feel it's very hypocritical as well, of course. But then as I was mentioning before, is thinking about how we can rethink formats, how we can hijack formats and the places and the format and the structures, the institution that we inhabit, and so it's more to think within this small pool of the world that I can touch and inhabit with my work, say. So I wouldn't know how to propose something much wider, I have to say. But an important part on this, of course, are establishing networks, and even if they are virtual, even if you don't get to meet, and it's about supporting each other. And a lot of this also the way again I try to think about budgets and other ways of using it when we get access to resources, because of course most of these institutions that we traverse, most of this money we deal with are very unethical, right? And so, it becomes very frustrating, it feels often very, very hypocritical, that's all I can say. And then I think a lot of the time, the work we try to do together is to just think about subverting these mechanisms. Yeah. But I don't know if I actually answer your question. Maybe you can tell us.
I mean, I'm not from here, obviously, and I think I'm interested in this idea of working from a distance. Obviously, I'm not Italian. There can be a little bit of an evasion in being American and not like sitting squarely and thinking about American problems. But I am kind of interested in the kind of distance of thinking about the question of blackness. Because obviously we know there's a international ubiquity of anti-blackness. Anti-blackness is what structures the kind of violence of colonial modernity. Anti-blackness is what structures in many ways the kind of imaginary of Italian citizenship. And at the same time, blackness is so time and place specific. It's so contingent, right? At the moment where Black Italians are thinking about do we call ourselves Afro-Italian? Do we call ourselves whatever other hyphen goes before Italian? We stopped saying Afro-American, I think, in the 80s. Like, it started being a little bit weird and racist in the 80s. So when I come here and I get called Afro-American, I'm like twitching a little bit, but it's like an understanding that there's a very different grammar in very different places, and because of Europe's distance from the violence for which they were responsible, there's an ability to remove themselves from it. And whereas in the United States, the plantation was right there. The plantation, people are still having weddings on the plantation.
Although, I mean, we have, in the south of Italy, it's quite clear.
Yeah.
But not only in south, I mean, Caporalato and the
Yeah.
Gangan master system is here as well.
Yeah.
And
But I think at the same time, there's an ethic in trying to understand, because I know that people's frustration is always that, like, the Black Americans are at it again. They're, like, imposing blackness in this particular way. And I think a lot of it is kind of a shadow boxing. Because on one hand, like, yes, there's an adoption and a kind of imposition of Americanness. And I know the number of Italians who've told me that Berlusconi turned Italy into an American colony. Like, yes, okay, heard. And blackness isn't that different, even as the political conditions that animate it are. And so I'm interested really in thinking about the continent in the way that it shows up in the films and the way that it is related to in the present, whether people are embracing the fact that they are from a place and embracing the multiplicity of identity or thoroughly trying to become Italian, which is, I mean, exactly like it is in the United States, right? A real digging into Blackness and its particularity or an aspiration to be American. So trying to kind of move back and forth as responsibly as possible, I guess. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe all I was thinking about is, because you brought up the question of teaching and pedagogy, so for me, pedagogy is a very, I mean, before I ever made a film and started my practice, I just wanted to go to schools and, you know, kind of bring colonial past, you know, and history into the school, because I felt like let down by the education system here. So that's still something that I find very important in, you know, in interacting with Italy and coming, you know, from elsewhere. But we try to devise, I mean, now I feel like I have access because I'm more, you know, the conversation has changed in the last 10 years. And so, for instance, I was able here in Turin to work with a prestigious, you know, high school, Liceo Gioberti. We did a work in the Parco del Valentino. But 10 years ago when I started, none of these, you know, more prestigious schools wanted to have anything to do with this. It was seen as something really political to talk about colonialism, to teach colonialism, so it was refused. And then I realized that I could enter the schools through art, because the art school were starving for people coming and you know, teaching you know, new methodologies. And so that's where I made a film, and that's where I, you know, entered the schools. And for a long time, those were the only schools I could enter. And then, of course, now, because I work with bigger institutions, you know, the access, but also because of the discourse after 2020 and the Black Lives Matter, and they, you know, when Indra Montanelli's statue was, you know, I don't want to say defaced, just painted. And, you know, the discourse has changed, and I think, you know, it's quite obvious, but I also feel like we are at the moment where things are regressing at the same time, right?
I was going to ask about that, I think, because this is a political condition across the West, the so-called Western world. Like, what does it mean in a context where people do not know and do not speak? What does it mean to have to try to move with some subtlety? To try to move in a way that's evasive, to move in a way that can kind of navigate around the forces that would censor and censure. And that's not a question that I've quite figured out. But I can talk about, in the United States, I can talk as much about Italian colonialism as I want to, and no one's going to be like, that's against the national myth, you know?
Yeah, and of course, I mean, there's, you know, privileges in, for me, being white, having an Italian you know, citizenship, and also being abroad. I feel like I can, it gives me a freedom sometimes to just take position, you know, and, you know, without risking anything, really. Just unpleasantry, really. But then, of course, for other people, it's not like this, right? What's at stake, especially in the States, I would say at the moment, you know, it's the whole question of citizenship also, it's not as, right, it's not safe, right? It's really, you don't know where things are going at the moment. So there's very different risks, and, yeah.
Okay, thanks. Thanks a lot. If there are any questions by the public? Some question? Also, you can speak Italian, and then there are the translations, so...
I had questions about your, to Alessandra. It's connecting to your question, last question also, Zoe, because I was very interested also to know about the reaction of students during these workshops with you, because Zoe talked about also the different identities, the multiple identities that in these days, especially we can see in the schools more than in the past. And so I was curious to understand how they react to these discourses about coloniality, if they are more aware than the older generation.
Yeah, I think it depends on the context, very much. It depends, and very much it depends on who your teachers are, because a lot of that is really, you know, you don't know, unless there is a teacher that is very invested. And even in the work, when you bring the workshop, some teachers feel it's imposed on them, and they even like create problems for you, and some people are, you know, really into it. So for instance, here I was very lucky to work with Enrico Manera, who's also a historian, and, you know, someone who, so, you know, so that also help in the way the students get engaged, of course. But it is quite random, although I have to say, you know, I like to go in, you know, less centered, central spaces. It's generally, yeah, it's where a lot of the more interesting conversations and people also in terms of, you know, the kind of journeys and what they bring in are found, I have to say. But I think, I mean, working with young people is quite nice, quite rewarding, I have to say. It's very difficult to find issues, you know. You find much more issues with, you know, staff at universities, you know, like, so, you know, yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks to everybody. Bye.
ready? Cool. Buongiorno a tutti. We are ready to start with the second talk of the day. We move to this very interesting panel with Lawrence Leck, Alan Butler, and Philip Di Salvo that will discuss AI, technological algorithmic systems, and how all of this somehow shapes the way we look at the world between reality and simulation. Thank you very much. I'll leave you the word.
Okay. Thanks, Salvatore, and everyone at Expose, and all of you for being with us in this very rainy Turin morning. My name is Philip Di Salvo. I'm a researcher and a journalist, and luckily for you, you're not going to hear much from me because I'm just moderating with this session with two great artists and speakers who have more interesting things to say than me. My work deals with journalism, AI, and black box technologies. So I come from a social scientist perspective, and it's going to be very interesting to be in dialogue with artists to navigate between reality, which is the realm of journalism, and fiction and simulation, which can also be more the realm of the arts. So let's see where this brings us. And today we're going to discuss about almost real, from reality to simulation and back. And we will try also to make sense whether we have to be back from simulation or whether we are fine to stay somewhere else. But jokes aside, we're going to discuss the role of virtual worlds, AI, and digital technologies in shaping universes in the arts and elsewhere. And I'm joined today by Alan Butler, who is a visual artist who mixes traditional new media as a means to explore subjects and ideas related to digital culture and the role and information of realities. You can see his work at the group show Almost Real, From Trace to Simulation, which goes on at OGR here in Turin in the context of Expose, where he's showing his work Virtual Botany Cyanotypes, which is quite interesting. If you were there yesterday night, you have definitely seen it. And I'm also joined by Lawrence Leck, who is a London-based artist and filmmaker and musician who mixes architecture, gaming, video, music, and fiction into, and I quote, a continuously expanding cinematic universe. And his work is also exposed here at Expose, of course, and the same group show with the work Empty Rider. So Alan and Lawrence will present some of the work that is here shown at the festival. And Alan, I would like to start with you, so the floor is yours, and thanks again for being here today.
Thanks, Philip. Let me just rehearse changing the slides. Okay, it works. Okay, so I just want to start here on this image, which is about 10 years ago, I started this series called Down and Out in Los Santos, and it was essentially an in-game photography project that used a virtual smartphone inside the video game Grand Theft Auto 5, and I was documenting these non-player characters that depicted the homeless population in the game city, which was called Los Santos. And I noticed there was this whole layer of the game world, which didn't really feature explicitly in the video game's narrative. And I'd spent a few years documenting these non-player characters and their surroundings in a mode that involved me like role-playing as a street photographer or a documentary photographer, but that role-playing helped me understand digital space in a particular way, that since the game's producers were in the business of producing a reality simulator, that in order to produce this realism, they decided to include this human misery as an aesthetic layer in the game. So although these images were taken inside a corporate entertainment simulation, I was arguing that these photographs were contemporary reality because the subject wouldn't be included in it if our world didn't first contain these like extreme levels of wealth disparity. So the simulation can have this kind of essential connection to our own perceived world, and furthermore, these homeless characters in the game, they're placed in the scenography as you play the game in the same way a lamppost or a building appears in the game. So in this way, poverty in the video game is essentially architecture. And I was beginning to think about this as a type of architecture photography. And, you know, like this architecture is even produced using the same tools that we design architecture and space today. So maybe it's worth noting as well that like I wasn't really involved in the photography scene before this, but I was, you know, I'm interested in media, and I was using photographic media as this means to, I guess, like recontextualize or critically reappraise these virtual spaces. And I spent several years actually producing the project that I'm exhibiting at Exposed Photo Festival, which is like just a fragment of this series, which specifically looked at the plant life inside video game worlds. And I found this type of architecture to be really fascinating, as you know, plants in video games are actually an architecture that's made out of a kind of digital photographic media. So going on a series of these meta nature walks, I was extracting the JPEG texture files and you know, from the game's database or the code itself, and I'm making these contact exposures through real sunlight onto photosensitive cyanotype paper in order to produce these kind of image objects. The form is, of course, borrowing from Anna Atkins in the 19th century, who made the cyanotype popular just 3 years after photography was invented. And you know, so the project in this mode, like Atkins, who is a botanist documenting plants, is a kind of quasi-survey of the botanical ecology of video games over the course of about 50 years. So the first plant specimen I find is from a game from 1974. This allows us to look at how the production of space in simulation has evolved, and it also gives us a peek into the black box of the image and spatial production pipeline of virtual architecture. But using chemical photography as a way to re-examine this architecture has all of these kind of sloppy, transformative effects as well. So while game worlds are very ordered and designed, and therefore they're to a certain extent predictable, you know, like in comparison to our perceived world around us, which is, you know, by contrast, maybe quite chaotic and arbitrary. So making exposures through real sunlight meant that I could choose to make an exposure when, you know, the clouds were about to conceal the sunlight. So it brings aspects of the cosmos into the final outcome. So you have these artifacts that are produced by our solar system. They're merging with this chemical noise from the cyanotype process. This is mixing with the paper texture, which is, if we don't forget, like this is dead plants that it's made from. And then it's also colliding with the pixel artifacts. And it ultimately produces this, you know, very like hybrid, like physical and digital photographic object. And when just one exposure is made, I, you know, cut the transparency film that I've used for the contact exposure. And so these works are transformed from digital files that, you know, are made to be reproduced infinitely every time you turn on your computer or, you know, start a video game, into these entirely unique physical objects. And thinking about the materiality in this way actually kind of continues to expand in a lot of my other projects. But to pick another photography-based project, this is a series called 100 Years of Solitude, which again uses 19th century photographic tools, but this time the wet plate collodion photograph. And it's using these 19th century photographic tools to document landscapes from inside video games that are set in the 19th century. So we have these landscape photographs of places that don't really exist, but they're rendered as physical objects on black glass and silver nitrate. And these are two, I guess, like substances which require very heavy extractive processes to get at the materials that eventually become photographic media. So when you look at these objects, the only thing that's really of this earth itself is the medium, and the image that's on the substrate or the surface is essentially culture. It's a collective hallucination of sorts. And so in this way, I approach photography as sculpture, and like my ideas about like the digital, even when they're in flow, is that like the digital and photography is always grounded as physical material.
Thanks a lot, Alan, and we have already lots of insights that we may discuss together, but Lawrence, I'll kindly ask you to present your work now.
Great, thanks everyone. If this starts. Great.
Yeah, cool.
So my process is a bit slightly different from that, in that basically for the last, I guess, 10 years, I've been trying to develop this idea called site-specific simulation, in which I'm thinking about which ways do place and space interact with our inhabiting multiple worlds at the same time. Whether that's the virtual space that we constantly find ourselves in, drifting back and forth between this and our physical reality. So the work that I'm showing at OGR is the third part in this ongoing series, which is set in a fictional smart city. A smart city is a kind of urban environment that constantly monitors and surveils the people or machines that are working inside it. The thing I'm interested in is really creating these worlds that are inhabited by characters who are avatars for our own human self. In this case, all the protagonists of these films, and it's usually films and video games that I'm making, are the AIs themselves. Of course, there's a lot of discussion nowadays about, AI as this apocalyptic thing that is in the process of being invented. But I think about these things as a science fiction author. What is the protagonist lacking, basically? In this case, in Black Cloud, it's about a smart city surveillance AI who's got depressed because they've sent everyone to prison. So the irony is that they've done their job perfectly, but that also means that they want to be something else. And so they spend their days surveilling the smart city, looking at the cars, the animals, the leftovers, who haven't broken the law yet, but thinking about the guilt that is about to come. So very often this, I guess my work cinematically is really about this idea of a journey and sometimes like a travelogue or a first-person coming-of-age story through these landscapes. And the way I build them is essentially sometimes projects start as an installation and then they become a film and then a video game, and sometimes they start as a soundtrack and they end up being an installation. So for example, how I install them is creating a scenography that reinforces the content of the film but exploded out into the gallery space or museum or whatever that might be. So in this case, the installation for Black Cloud is it is the video with a series of exploded car parts that frame the screens around it. In the upstairs space in this gallery, I also made 2 touchscreen-based video games, kind of like the touchscreen on self-driving cars, because I was also thinking about this scenario in where if you no longer need to drive as a human passenger or as a human driver, you entertain yourself. And the kind of dystopian entertainment is you're basically playing as the self-driving car, being trained, and you make these choices. Do you speed up? Do you turn left? Do you hit the fox? Do you avoid it? And as you're doing that, you're getting assessed by a kind of compliance score, whether you're being a good or a bad car. the second part in the trilogy is called NOx, which is short for non-human excellence. And in this case, the smart city has got even worse, and I transformed a building in Berlin to a rehab center for self-driving cars who are bad. And in this case, basically, this goes back to the site-specific ideas. Sometimes I actually really start with a site and then transform that into a virtual space. So the 3-floor shopping center, I transformed into like a different landscape. So on the ground floor, you encounter the crash test site, and as you move through it, the narrative of the film gradually unfolds. So the way I was thinking about it, it's like in a video game, in a 3D video game, you walk into different zones, and each different zone has a different story or triggers different behaviors. Here, it's literally a walking simulator, where as you walk around, you have headphones that track where you're going, and the story that you're told depends on your place within the installation. So moving up from the ground floor to the upstairs bit, it transforms into more of an interior kind of clinical zone where you hear about various fragments of how your car is doing. So for example, I was thinking about, when you get your computer repaired and you get it back 5 days later, the technician's like, oh, we changed your hard drive, we changed the screen, we changed the keyboard, we changed the case. But it's, is it still the same computer or is it not? So the journey of the rehabilitation of the self-driving car also follows this 5-day rehab pattern. And it culminates, you can maybe see just actually in the distance here, with a scene of equine therapy. Equine therapy is, therapy with horses that you get at really fancy rehab centers. But I thought this might make sense to a car because not only do they identify with the wildness of the animal, but also the horse was, an industrial agricultural machine until they were no longer useful. And, horse population in urban centers went right down in the 20th century with the car. So in a sense, the car sees the horse as two things. One is their future self when they're no longer useful and they all become scrap. And the other thing, object of their guilt, like how many of these amazing creatures have my kind unknowingly killed, basically, through no fault of their own. And so this tragic narrative is really one of the things I'm interested in. And in Empty Rider, which is showing as a film in OGR, its stuff has got even worse, and the self-driving car didn't do well at rehab, and they are on trial for trying to kill their owner. The staging of it, it's similar at OGR, this was it in Geneva, is like in a courtroom where the self-driving car has to basically defend its own legal rights as a person. The irony here, I was thinking, is that, as AI is one of these areas it's a gray area, both in terms of legal issues, technological ones, and social ones, and cultural ones. So because when things are a gray area, especially legally, technological companies use this, explicitly try to develop their products in these legal gray zones so that they can, they don't have to obey the normal regulations and laws which generally protect humans. And in this case, long story short, things went really bad and the car has to defend itself by appealing to the idea of doli in capax, my Latin is really bad, which is basically the legal principle that a child cannot commit an offense, cannot be found guilty of a crime. And throughout human history, children have had different legal definitions. I believe in Roman law, you could be found guilty if you were 12 years old and over that. So now it's 18, age of consent and so on changes from territory to territory. But the takeaway I was trying to do for Empty Rider is creating empathy with these things that we're making because they are adolescents coming of age rather than adults to be judged. Thanks.
Thank you, Loris, and thank you Ellen for these presentations, which gives lots of insights for our conversation. And while I was listening to you both, this idea of the interplay was constantly resonating with me. And I would like you to kind of situate your work into this era, maybe starting with you, Alan. In your case, I see the interplay between virtual worlds, so the video games being brought back to our reality to the point that we lose, like, was at least my impression while I was walking, looking at your work, that we lose like the sense, oh, this is actually the simulation. Is the simulation like the plants in the video games, or the simulation are the plants brought back from the video games to reality? So how do you see this in the context of your work?
Yeah, well, like it's a really difficult question to answer because it just keeps like bouncing back and forth.
Sorry.
But it is interesting to just kind of get to the core of the motivations behind this kind of work. And like, you know, if we were thinking about back in 2016 when I started like doing this stuff and imagining what was happening in the world at the time. And, it was fair that before 2016, a lot of people, normal people who just weren't chronically online would have made a very big distinction between, the real and or the reality and the internet even, and, the election of Donald Trump and then Brexit and things like this kind of also kind of demonstrated that, this fissure ripped in the fabric of the network, and the network kind of poured into reality and began to like merge with this digital representation of itself in a way. And like it's kind of like mind-blowing, but I was kind of trying to approach these spaces as if they were real, because more and more of our daily lives are exist on digital networks. And the I guess the thing about that is like when we have ways to think about how space is produced. Like there's lots of ways that like exist. So you can think about like Henri Lefebvre, the French philosopher in the early 1970s, writes this book called The Production of Space. And there's he's basically saying that we have to stop thinking about space as in terms of geometry and mathematics, as humans have since the age of Descartes. And he instead says that like space is something that's socially produced. It's produced through social means, through economy, through politics. And he uses a really good like analogy for that, which is the spatial triad of how social space is produced in the world, which involves three things. The first is conceived space. So people who are able to draw up and imagine space and have the power to do so. And those people are generally governments or town planners or architects. And then you have a thing called perceived space. And this is the physical space we navigate through the world now. So we are perceiving this room around us. It has a particular shape, and we can use it in a kind of utility way. But then we have this final thing called lived space. And lived space is the social, it's the symbolic dimension to how space is produced. And all these things are kind of, they're not fixed or in flux, moving around with each other. But I think, thinking about how space is produced in 1974, you could apply this to how, like Meta designs its systems across the world, or you could do it to video games. I don't think we need like a new kind of way to reimagine how like power operates and tries to kind of corral us into living in particular ways. So in terms of what's real and what's not, I think these are like they're both real, but we use these different words in order to kind of break up little definitions and access them in different ways, maybe.
That's brilliant, thank you. And Lawrence, instead, in your case, the interplay, well, there is, again, something similar between reality and fiction, but there is also, like, in the speculative fiction that you create an interplay between future and present. And of course, while I was looking at your work, I was seeing Teslas or Tesla lookalike self-driving cars and assassinated CEOs that resonated quite maybe too much with reality. So I'm also curious to know whether you see this interplay between present and future, and does your work tell us more about the present we're living in or the future we may end up living in?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, I feel like as the time frame of my science fiction stories has come closer and closer in time, that decision has slightly, that relationship or that time lag or delay has slightly changed. For example, I started off by making, you know, stories set in 40 years in the future, 40 to 50 years in the future. And I feel very often in, you know, 80s and 90s science fiction, things were often set, you know, 2019, Blade Runner, I think, around now. And I feel when a science fiction author would be setting something 40 or 50 years in the future, what they're trying to say is this might happen in your lifetime, but it's not an immediate threat now. It's kind of like climate crisis as well. It's, you know, if it's more than 20 or 30 years, it's bearable and it kind of becomes entertainment. But lately it's more set in the present day where, for example, real world events collide with what used to be a fiction thing. Going back to this idea of, you know, simulation or speculation, just thinking about the different, you know, speculation, you have speculation as speculative fiction, or what does it literally mean? It just means to be able to, like, gaze into the future, right? But you also have financial speculation and all sorts of predictive mechanisms for trying to predict the future. And this is kind of the holy grail of so much data science, AI, stock market trades, trend forecasting as well. And as very often my work involves research and then fictionalizing the research, this relationship is never quite clear. So sometimes, for example, in Empty Rider, the OGR work, I've been looking at legal systems and what might be happening. Sometimes I think about, you know, what do wealthy people do when they want to get a rehabilitation break? And then I try and transpose that onto different intelligent beings. But just going to what Alan was saying about Lefebvre, for example, you know, I feel, I'm no expert, but also in that time frame, 1974, it's kind of like post-68, leftist, discussion is very much about power and deconstructing power into, like, you know, different strata of reality. I also think about this a lot because, you know, in general, I'm constructing the world in which my films take place, like a set designer or a game designer, but also doing that, trying to build a story that is implicit in that location. Just like, you know, in Renaissance stage sets, you would get the tragedy type, the comedy type, and different settings. So each of these sets is meant to suggest a certain power structure. Like the courtroom is very, pretty much the most explicit spatial representation that's not in an urban form of, like, power structures and trying to regulate different power structures so it doesn't become, a society doesn't become a dictatorship, but it can as well. And I think the final thing I'll say about, I was thinking simulation, this question of moving between, you know, digital and reality is one of the eternal philosophical questions, isn't it? You know, Plato's cave in Chinese Taoist philosophy, there's like Zhuangzi's like butterfly dream, which is like, are we living in the dream or the simulation? Dream or reality, which is the matrix problem. What's it called? In you know, proper philosophy, it's called the brain in vat problem. You know, how do we know we're not living in a vat and being simulated? But that's an eternal one that in, I guess, many different artists' work, we flip between both. Yeah.
And another idea I had, I mean, reality, I mean, this reality where we are now, it's kind of grim these days, like politically speaking, environmentally speaking, socially speaking. So the kind of the impulse to kind of exit reality, as Valentina Tani would say, by the way, is kind of intense. So since the panel is also from simulation and back, I wonder whether the back part of the conversation really reflects something we want? Or, I mean, in this interplay between simulation and reality, do you see your work also as an exit strategy in a sense? Both of you. Yeah.
Well, I may as well start. Yes and no. Like, I think like my work moved to kind of dealing with the material as a kind of way to do politics in a more subtle way. I felt as somebody who is making a lot of what used to be called like internet art and things like that for years after I finished art school the first time, you know, the more mainstream and the more like everyday that internet content became part of everyone's everyday life, it kind of felt like, well, like why would we necessarily use this in a way to kind of talk, like it kind of makes art difficult, you know, in that because it just becomes too much, you know, like people don't go to art galleries to do Twitter, they go to Twitter to do Twitter, you know, and that kind of logic. But like there's just different ways of accessing the subject, you know, like the medium for me is the subject, and you know, thinking about its materiality is the way to think about how these things begin to operate, and from there we can think about how these worlds are produced, who gets to produce the worlds, who are the users, and you know, like there's so many different approaches to that. But like for me, it was just this thing of saying like I don't want to end up making art about Donald Trump, you know? Like it would just be awful to do that, you know?
The image that came to my mind is that if you know, because we're on stage now, really, is like if simulation was a character in a play, right? So the lights come up, simulation enters, simulation does their thing, and then simulation exits, right? That's, in some ways, that's how we would like it to be, so that we don't have to deal with this, you know, wool being pulled over our head and, you know, big data and things like this. But just visualizing it like that made me think it's it's not going to happen like that. It's kind of like the character that they stay on the stage. You know, they enter and they stay on the stage throughout the rest of the duration, and they're kind of like, you know, they're this trickster who kind of manipulates things, even though the other characters, sometimes they see them and sometimes they don't. So I think somehow that analogy makes sense to me, because it's essentially how, you know, very often big data and AI and surveillance operates. Sometimes you're conscious of it, sometimes you see an artwork that says, yeah, surveillance bad, and then you're like, oh yeah, surveillance is bad, then you forget about it. And I feel it's this ambient presence of simulation that really is one of the defining features, much like, I guess, surveillance in a way. You know, you're conscious about it, and sometimes you forget about it. And whether you're conscious of it or not, it's kind of, it's present. And I think as artists, how you deal with that, sometimes you might feel this issue really needs to be addressed directly and explicitly, and then the next day you're like, oh, that was a bit cringe, that was a bit much, and then you pull back, and then things become more metaphorical. And so for me, making fictions that sometimes talk to realities and sometimes talk to real world issues, sometimes people will get it today. If, for example, you're like, oh, this looks like a certain real world figure, but in 25 years, that figure may or may not be forgotten, and then people just see it as a generic CEO, bad boss archetype. So that popular knowledge evolves at a different pace, and sometimes it intersects.
And another point that I think is crucial for both of your work is the technology itself, which is, in sense, also the tools that you use to create your work, but is also the subject of that. So I'm going to be the boring academic for a while, but in my work, the critique of kind of the political economy of the technology is crucial. So I wonder if that is also part of your process when you approach technology, both as a subject of your work and as a tool that you use. I mean, is the critical side important in a way?
Yeah, for me, definitely, you know, and it's kind of like, there's aspects when you're dealing with the materiality of digital things. You know, you can think about undersea cables and data centers and, you know, mountains being cut down to access copper and doing this kind of ecocide that produces a data center that, you know, boils the ocean and all this kind of stuff, you know. And they're kind of like incredibly like complex and entangled systems that like we don't really understand how they work exactly, but we understand them enough to know that they exist. And I think for me, like thinking about media and how digital media works and how networks work and how the language of things like photography has changed in relation to the networks, that it's not just about a process of picture making, it's a process of publishing and sharing and disseminating, and all of these things have this hardware element to it. And so it in a way comes down to that kind of question over time, is that we need to be more ecologically aware. Yeah. And I think thinking about the hardware, even like you'll see it in Lawrence's work there, like he's not necessarily just showing a video, you're walking into an exploded car sometimes in those things. There's a kind of like the viewer is implicated in that kind of like scenario. So like I think like hardware is the kind of elephant in the room in a way, but it's also the way we get to access and think ecologically about what it is when we produce an image in the networked age in that way, yeah.
Short one. It's interesting because, you know, there's always critical as a thing in itself is not necessarily a good thing, and it's not necessarily critique is often critical, but it's rarely critical in a way that changes the thing that it's critiquing. You know, this is like the critic's curse in a sense. It's what is it? Cassandra complex. You know, no one believes you, right? You know the world is burning, AI is taking over, but it's like we'll deal with it next year. So I think particularly with technology, I feel the issue is that you know, technological industries, or at least innovation, happens in a way that is already intensely self-critical, but the criteria that they're using are generally like performance ones, like let's get more users, let's get more sales, let's get more eyeballs on this product. And you know, many critiques of capitalism in a similar way have been like, what is it about the system that, you know, it's this like monster you know, it's this monster that whatever you do, no matter how you attack it, it just comes back stronger because it has the ability to absorb the critique and weaponize it, or, you know, use it to improve the system that you're trying to attack. So this idea of, you know, as Alan is saying, like maybe if the software can absorb critiques, maybe it's about exposing the hardware, maybe it's about creating certain kinds of experience in which you witness the way things are. You can't, I personally feel that as an artist, my role is not to change minds and opinions. Like that's, you know, that's propaganda, that's a different thing. But you can create certain experiences, certain encounters, or that might unfold over time, that might point into a certain direction, because, you know, as a, you know, for me myself, the moment I am told something to do, I will want to do the opposite. So I don't know why that would be any different just because I have, you know, a title as an artist on somewhere.
Thanks, guys. I think we're a bit running out of time, so if there is one question for the audience, I will give priority to that. Yes, there's one. So if there is a mic, I don't know. Yeah. Yeah.
Excuse me, Alan. Okay, so you bring us from the reality to technology, and we are witnessing the opposite. We are witnessing how from the technology, the Israeli terrorist soldiers are using technology, laughing, watching the screen video, how they kill, and laughing as they are playing games. This takes me to ask actually, when was the moment you decide what you are doing, you want to bring it to the art field, and what is the contribution to our humanity with this definition of placing this technology in the art? Thank you.
Would I answer that? Yeah.
Is that for anybody?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I guess it's kind of very like, existential question for artists to think about, is it worthwhile what we do is essentially what you're asking. Like, is the subject we've chosen and production modality an essential thing for this moment, and we could think about, I guess we should be maybe thinking about, where do we go from here? Like the post-genocide situation, in Gaza, is going to completely change how, the economy works, capitalism works, international politics works, and the technology we use. I think there's out there some really more kind of, there's artists that are really tackling this specifically in relation to this subject. Nura Tafeshe is an amazing researcher who's been looking at the kind of weaponization of waifu aesthetics by the Israeli occupying forces, and how they're kind of using the networked image as a kind of weapon within all that. And I think there definitely is, there's people dealing with this subject in that way, and I don't think personally my work addresses these kinds of politics at all. In fact, this is a process that was kind of years and years in the making as well. So the work I'm showing at the photo festival here today, was produced before what you're saying. So I don't feel like my work can respond to it in that way. I don't know. Do you have any perspectives on it?
I have some perspectives. I think maybe a central problem is that technology and war have always gone hand in hand, without a doubt, whether that's in weapons making or kind of building political support around things. My personal stance is that apart from individual examples of conflict and injustice, which are very unequally distributed throughout time, a friend of mine reminded me the other week that I think, here we are in 2025, and how history rhymes and repeats with itself. I think basically Walter Benjamin did a critique of Nazi aesthetics, saying that the Nazis aestheticized politics. And his suggestion was that maybe the role of artists in a certain era may be to politicize aesthetics, because the domain that I can control is only that which is within my artwork. And because I personally don't want to be didactic in the form or the message that it's giving, that's my role, is to politicize the aesthetics into as nuanced a degree as I can do. Yeah, thanks.
I think we are still in time for the other talk, so I think this is also a very nice way of closing. So thanks a lot, Alan. Thanks a lot, Lawrence. Thanks a lot to Expose for having us, to all the people contributing to this, technicians, volunteers, and translators included. And have a great day today with the other talk and with the festival, and see you soon. Thanks.
Okay, we are ready to start with the last talk of this morning. We kind of stay in the realm of human, non-human relationships, but now we move a bit into topics related more, that relate more with climate, with our relationship with nature, but through the very interesting perspective of two artists that are exhibiting at Exposed. So I'm very happy to welcome Paolo Cirio with a very interesting outdoor installation, the Cortile of Palazzo Carignano, and Sheng-Wen who has, we could call it a retrospective, with presenting different works at Archivio di Stato. The show is curated by Daria Tuminas from Photodoc. The talk is moderated by Marina Paulenka, directly from Berlin, from Fotografisca Berlin. And we are very happy to have Marina with us. So I leave you the stage. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Salvatore. Thank you, Exposed Photography Festival, for inviting us to discuss this very interesting topic. And hello, everyone. And thank you for joining us for, I would say, this timely and tangled conversation on coexistence and control, the complex ties between human and non-human. As we face accelerating climate change, species extinction, and ecological injustice, artists are increasingly stepping into roles once reserved for scientists, for activists, for lawmakers, proposing new ways of seeing, feeling, and being in relation with the non-human world. Today, we'll explore how art can illuminate and complicate the entangled relationships between humans and other species, systems, ecologies. We will ask questions like, can art offer not just critique, but care? What happens when nature becomes a plaintiff? And is it possible to love a species and still exploit it? I'm thrilled to be joined by two artists who each explore these topics in a radically different way, but beautifully complementary. Sheng-Wen, who uses photography, video installation to explore our contradictory relationship with animals, oscillating between affection and surveillance, intimacy and control. His work nudges us to reflect who is being watched and who is doing the watching. And Paolo Cirio, meanwhile, hacks into system of power, fusing law, data, and art in projects like Climate Tribunal and Extinction Claims, where fossil fuel corporations are symbolically put on a trial. His work blurs the line between art and activism, proposing that extinction is not only a biological process, but also a political one. We will, of course, all together reflect on ethical stakes of representing non-human life, limits and possibilities of artistic activism, and how art might help to move forward to empathy. So let's dive in. You both are showing your work at this festival. Paolo, you have a public installation. It's a kind of new body of work. Sheng, you're showing, let's say, not a retrospective, but an exhibition that brings three body of your works. I would like to see what is your connection of non-human, and is it about empathy, confrontation, or something else entirely? I think the best way would be that you show your work and speak about it, let's say 5 to 10 minutes, so audience can understand what is it about. Later we will jump into discussion. We have 45 minutes, and then later we invite all of you to join us into 15 minutes of Q&A. Sheng, would you like to start?
Hello? Oh, yeah, great. Pardon me for the long slide, but I won't bore you with too much of my words because we only have like 10 minutes. And a lot of information is in the exhibition in venue number 2, so I'll basically just run through the slides with minimum explanation. I'm showing 3 projects. The first one is White Bear, which consists of a series of images with polar bears in artificial constructs. that is zoos and aquariums. I started this project a long time ago, like 10 years ago, with the hypothesis that the polar bear would probably look quite awkward no matter where you put it in artificial settings. This is the map with polar bears in captivity, and the red pins are the, I think, 46 locations I have carried out this project. The practice of keeping polar bears in captivity is very long, and it originates in early 20th century. You might think it's very different now, but unfortunately, in a lot of cases, it's quite similar to more than a century ago, in which bears are kept in a space that is maybe smaller than your living room, which induces this robotic behavior called a stereotypical behavior. You might think that in this case it's in China, so maybe it's normal, but the same also happens in many accredited zoos in Europe. And sometimes you see some interesting clues in the tickets and brochures from these institutions. For example, a zoo in France and actually a shopping mall in China where it hosts polar bears can have the same bear in their graphic designs. So who is copying who? No one is copying. Actually, it's downloaded from the internet for like less than 30 euros. You can have this bear in your design. And in the exhibition, there will be many different cases, some good and some not so good. I'll just run through the slides because a lot of information is in the text in the exhibition. You can check it out. It's a very advanced and new enclosure from Copenhagen, which cost, I think, 20 million euros to build. And it hosts 4 polar bears, which is, I think the enclosure is far too small for polar bears. When you consider the bears will travel more than 50 kilometers a day in the wild. And some unfortunate event happened even though the enclosure is brand new. Some very sad event happened, unfortunately, I think 2 years ago. And there are some pretty good cases as well. By pretty good, it's a relative standard. I think depends on how you view it. Same goes to Japan. In Sapporo, they also have a new enclosure, opened, I think, 7 years ago, which costs also like around 17 million euros to build. That's, I think, 2.3 billion yen. And that's, in context, is more than the revenue of a lot of zoos for 1 year. So that says something about keeping polar bears in captivity. If you try to keep the bears in good condition, it costs a lot of money, oftentimes several million euros or tens of millions of euros, which may marginalize the money that goes into other species inside the zoo. So by focusing on polar bears, I think it is possible to address the problematic side of captive animal programs, not from an anthropocentric perspective or anthropomorphism perspective, in which I don't have to photograph the bears in sad expressions or sad moments. The bear simply has to stand there or be there, and it will look pretty awkward. And the second little project is the Down project, which I did in the Netherlands and also in the Arctic, because it's a result of a residency in the Arctic in Svalbard actually. And in preparation of this residency, I didn't know what to do, so I just started trying to buy some clothes for the residency because it's going to be cold in the Arctic. And the recommendation from the residency told us that we should bring a heavy down jacket to the expedition. So I tried to look for one. But in the process, I realized that maybe it's not possible for me to tell if the down jacket came from animal-friendly sources or reliably sustainable sources. Even though that there are a lot of labels or certificates, it is impossible really to tell what's going on behind the scenes. So I decided to do something that is a bit embarrassing, and by that I mean I saw some geese living in my neighborhood, and they naturally shed a lot of feathers to the pasture where they are like grazing. By the way, these are escaped farm geese. So I decided to kind of pick these feathers from the ground and try to make my own down jacket and wear it to the Arctic to see if I will freeze to death. So that was me. And the geese were pretty confused because in the Netherlands, when you are with the plastic bag, and it means that you are going to feed them with bread or something. So they anticipate that I feed them with delicious bread, but they didn't. So they yelled at me a lot. I muted the video because it's too loud. So the neighbors are also alerted. You see this little girl here, and she's asked by her parents to check this strange Asian dude. What's he doing? Is he a threat or not? So you can see she's doing a fake dog walking. And so she reports back to her parents now, like this Asian dude is okay. He's just picking up feathers. And so there's a lot of encounters with the neighbors. I find it quite fun for me. And she gave me 2 very big feathers, and yeah, she's very nice. and this is a small trailer of me trying to make the down jacket. I try to collect like 300 grams of feathers because that's normally the amount of feathers I need for a decent down jacket, but I end up collecting less than 100 grams, which is roughly 3,000 feathers. They are incredibly light. So I bought like a second-hand jacket and cut it open and try to put the feathers I collected into the jacket to make like a DIY down jacket. It's in a rush, as I don't have much time. So the day I finish the jacket is the day I travel to the Arctic. And in the expedition, we make, I think, 20 or so landings in different parts of the Svalbard Svalbard area, which is very close to the North Pole. You might be curious after all this hassle if the jacket was warm enough. The answer was no. It was not warm enough. It was very cold, but the goal was to survive. It's not to be luxurious, but for that purpose, the jacket saved my life. This is a little booklet telling you how to do it by yourself and how to make your own down jacket. No matter where you are, you can follow my footsteps and make your own down jacket. And it's totally possible. If I survive the Arctic, I think you can survive your environment as well. And somebody actually did it. And during the pandemic, my friend actually repeated the whole process and collect feathers and make her own down jacket, which is very nice. Yes. And I will be quick on the final project, which is the Matter of Skill project. So it's done during the pandemic, which I finished an artist residency in Amsterdam, and I'm looking for another job. And at that time, a YouTube algorithm recommended me to become a seaweed farmer. And I was totally sold by the idea because it was marketed as really eco-friendly agriculture or aquaculture. And you can earn a decent amount of money if you have a small plot of seaweed in the coastal area in the Netherlands. So I said, oh, why not? I can take a break from being an artist and become a farmer and make some money. How nice it would be. So I decided to become a seaweed farmer. And I learned that there are a lot of narratives that kind of illustrate how good seaweed farming is. It doesn't need fresh water, it doesn't need land or fertilizers, and it can save a myriad of problems like a climate change and food crisis during COVID. It's mentioned that it can also help you get rid of COVID. So it seems like it can solve almost all the problem except the Ukrainian war at that time. But there are also plenty of courses telling me how to farm seaweed, which is very complicated. I tried to follow it, but I couldn't grasp on it. Plus that Dutch seaweed farmer told me that I'm out of luck because all the places available for seaweed farming was already occupied. So that's a bummer for me. But at that time, I saw this seemingly like a gold rush situation, like people are trying to expand these eco-friendly sector. The seaweed farming seems to be the solution or part of the solution to a lot of dire questions facing our planet right now. So that get me questioning. It is really logical for us to expand seaweed farming indefinitely, like many farmers are kind of suggesting, cultivating the ocean and cultivating like 1% of the ocean with a seaweed farm. Is that really going to play out for us, or are there any unforeseen consequences? And for that, we can reference China, which also has already a very large cultivation of seaweed farms, which are measured in square kilometers. And there are some issues, of course, if we do that without regulating it vigorously, or a lot of monitoring has to be done, or but it has not been carried out in East Asia. So that causes some problem. So that brings the project. I decided to make this project to kind of hint maybe the problematic aspect of eco-friendly sectors expanding without too much monitoring, or without adequate monitoring from us. So perhaps everything is a matter of scale, and maybe good endeavors may lead into unpredictable results. So I made this installation. You can see it in section 2 of the venues in Exposed, in which I used like eco-friendly materials to make the exhibition. But I put a lot of eco-friendly materials, in this case collected waste fishing nets inside the exhibition, which may still suffocate the space, which makes you feel a little bit uncomfortable when you walk through the installation and trying to watch the videos. You may get irritated by the nets. And finally, a few years ago, there is a talk of expanding the seaweed sector with mechanical harvesting. You can see that Unilever and Shell is jumping into this business and pouring some money or a lot of money into this seaweed making sector. that rings some alarm bells, because when big companies start pouring money into one sector, sometimes it's difficult to reverse the process. So I'll end with one quote from the North Sea Farmers, which is an organization promoting large-scale seaweed farming in North Sea that is very close to the Netherlands. So when asked about the potential issues of large-scale seaweed farming, the North Sea Farmers replied by the quote in pink. It says, "We need to get to a large scale first to be able to figure out what's going on." So I think that's the same for a lot of green endeavors or eco-friendly endeavors. We are trying to do good to the world, but we are doing something. Sometimes it's unpredictable, and sometimes it's a paradox that we need to get to that scale before we understand what's going on. But can we reverse the process? And that's it.
Thank you.
And by the way, there's a tour today at 4 at venue number 2. If you are interested in more anecdotes, please visit the tour. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheng. Paolo, would you like to briefly introduce your work exhibition?
Yes. Hi, I'm Paolo Cirio. I'm actually from Turin. I work internationally. I was invited to present this installation, which is at the Palazzo Carignano. It's basically where there is the Museum of Risorgimento. You can cross the square. And this is one side of the installation. Which is about climate change, but in particularly around glaciers. Of course, due to global warming, the glaciers are melting. This is part of a bigger body of works that I've done around climate change in the past 3-4 years. That's actually the title is a Climate Tribunal, and I will get there. And so has to do with the legal and economic, but also a question of aesthetics of climate change. The installation is composed by this monument, actually is a memorial. It's a memorial to the glaciers of the Alps. So basically, the Alps are disappearing, are dying. And they are dying out of this kind of war, in a way. And so this is like to remember them. These are all names of all the glaciers in the Alps. So from Piedmont to Switzerland, France, Austria, and so on. So there are around 3,000 glaciers, and some of them already disappeared, of course. The smallest ones are gone, and the other ones are disappearing in a matter of 10 years or something. So this is kind of like a memorial to remember these things that won't come back for sure. And so that is the purpose. And on the sides, there are these flags, which are the flags that represent the ones that killed those glaciers. So the fossil fuel companies, actually one is also Shell, you just mentioned Shell, the Dutch oil companies. These flags are soaked in real motor oil, so they smell a lot. You can try to touch them, but be careful. They're very oily, dirty, and horrible, but that's really the representation of what it is, this particular product, which is fossil fuel. So these companies some are more known, like Shell, BP, but for instance, this logo that you're seeing, no one really recognized it, although it's an incredibly powerful company from Saudi Arabia, actually, which has also some very important geopolitical implications. So in this case, is an installation that I would call documentary work, because in fact it does document the glaciers, does put that in connection to these companies that are causing global warming. And then there is some of the pictures you're seeing are pictures from glaciers from all over the world, and they're printed on this very delicate white fabric. So there is also this kind of like a contrast between the the fact that glaciers, ecosystem, natural ecosystem are very delicate, while these industries are not, are actually very heavily intensive, resource consuming and so on. This is part of a bigger project that is called Extinction Claim, which is not only about glaciers, but actually many other ecosystems and many other species. You might know that we are going through a mass extinction. So mass extinction means that thousands, actually scientists say that 1 million species are about to disappear in a few decades, and probably it's more than 1 million. So the project here is quite interactive in a way. There is a website where I aggregated all this data, so it's around 40,000 species that are they're endangered. That includes trees, fungi, fish, mammal, any kind of species that are endangered, so it's actually a huge database. And then the idea that you can do it online on this website, extinctionclaim.com, or in the installation, not here, but in other venues, there was this postcard where basically you can claim in behalf of the species to have economic reparation, or actually getting compensation and suing directly the fossil fuel companies. And that postcard, that claim, that complaint goes to the European Commission that should tax those companies and use those revenues to actually preserve nature as it is disappearing. And this is also a big installation with this project. These are all different pictures of species. This was actually here in Turin, a Fondazione Merz, a couple of years ago. And so this is also a matter of scale. That's the idea. On the side, we have a short list of those companies that are causing this mass extinction. And actually, they're not just causing it, but the reason why they're very accountable for what is going on is because they are disinforming us, and they are also pushing for more consumption. So yes, most people here would say, well, but it is us, consumers, that are causing climate change. But actually, they have a very, very precise interest that we consume more. And especially they also very, very in private interest to keep producing their products and actually selling always more, right? So that's part of a bigger legal, economic question around the fossil fuel industry. And this is a book I published just 1 year ago, where I present all this evidence, all this history, also from a philosophical point of view, and articulate all these ideas, and also from an aesthetic point of view of representation or misrepresentation of climate change in culture, actually. And that's how I see also some connection here, actually also point at this idea of like a green revolution or green transition, and it's actually not really working out, as you explained in that particular case of the seaweed, or also the polar bear, in a way. Climate change for years, or 10, 20 years, was always presented as a polar bear problem, which of course is very ridiculous and silly in a way. Thank you.
Thank you, Paolo. Thank you, Sheng, for presenting your work. I would like now to open this discussion with actually discussing your methodology and talking about responsibility in a also very philosophical way, let's say. So Sheng, basically in using surveillance-like methods, like you are doing in your work, I was wondering, are we meant to emphasize with the observed, or actually recognize ourselves as watchers? In another word, your work often balances between affection and control. So is it possible to love a species and still exploit it? And where do we draw that line?
Yes, I think for me, empathy is a very complex word. It can be a double-edged sword. For example, sometimes when it concerns non-humans, sometimes we have good intentions. For example, like the case of like what I mentioned, like feeding the geese with bread, or feeding pigeons with bread. It's very popular in the Netherlands and other parts of the world. You can see bird feeders feeding wild animals. They have good intention. They empathize with the birds and geese that are roaming in our cities. But then it can be out of control, and normally it does. And feeding wild animals can have worse consequences than, for example, littering trash in public space. Ecologically speaking, it can contribute at least as bad as littering when we use our good intentions and empathize and feed the wild animals. And the other case I can think of is some of us likes cats a lot, and some of our cats likes to go outdoors. So there's the culture of neighborhood cats. The cats are walking around the neighbors in your neighborhood. That is kept usually outdoors in spring and summer times. But that may not play well for other wild animals, especially wild birds, or also maybe endangered insects or wild birds. They may be the prey of these human-introduced species, in this case, the cats. In this case, we are also trying to please the cats, let it run in outdoors to keep the cats happy, but it may lead to some unexpected consequences. So for me, the work on not directly about empathy, but rather to address our responsibility, our agency as human, and in a deeper level, perhaps help us maybe realize that we are human, because it is very difficult for us to acknowledge or factor in the fact that we are not a species that should be taken for granted every day. Like, we as humans, our actions has consequences, and we don't live our day thinking that all the time. We don't wake up in the morning saying that, oh, I'm a human, I'm about to start my day. Nobody wake up like that. You just go and eat breakfast. You don't wake up and say that I'm human. But our every action has consequences, and it's maybe as a small reminder that we are human, and what we are doing may lead to unexpected results. Yeah.
And I have a slightly speculative question. Do you think animals are aware we are watching? And if they did, would they care?
I think that depends on the animal and what case we are talking about. If we are talking about, for example, polar bears and lions and these bigger animals inside zoos or in captivity, yes, they are aware that we are watching them, and sometimes the zoos and aquariums, they does not provide a place for the animals to hide. Making them exposed to human gaze all the time, and that may stress the animals. Thank you. For example, a lion is very accustomed to viewing everything from above. It wants to take the higher ground and look at everything in its vicinity. But sometimes a lion inside the zoo can be placed at ground level or even lower than humans. So that gaze is kind of like not really working well for lions. It kind of caters towards the visitor's experience. So a lot of modern zoos, they try to design in a more vertical way so that lion can take the upper ground and it can survey what's going on. So line of sight sometimes is very important in zoo design. Yes.
To switch on Paolo's methodology. So Paolo, your work often uses technology and data to explore hidden systems. How do you see this relating to ecological responsibility or interspecies entanglement? Because your you place glaciers and ecosystems in the role of plaintiffs. So what happens legally or ethically when nature goes to the court? So can a landscape win a case?
Yes, well, there have been cases where the river won a case against the state. There are cases around the world. There is a legal statement from forest and so on. Actually, I think the first idea was already in the 60s, in the 70s, if the forest can have a stand in a legal court. So that's something that's kind of accepted. What is interesting is that this is a completely new legal field. So even law and ecology, as much as law and technology, is a completely new, new in the history of human law, of course. And so there is also something called legal imagination that lawyers use to think how we can deal with nature, with climate change, and figuring not only regulations, but accountability. And that is actually a very creative process, and lawyers that are involved in this field, they would tell, well, we have to think and come up with some new creative ideas to figure out how to deal with this. As much as in the technological field, as we saw in the works before, for instance. And so, as an artist, indeed, I can intervene legally. Of course, I am not a lawyer or a judge, but definitely imagining that there is that possibility, simulating that possibility that would inspire anyway, or would also just change perception around certain things, or just suggesting that actually there are the means, there are the ways to make those companies pay for the damage they are causing, and there are also means and ways to protect nature or ecosystem as much as we can at this point, really. But people don't just think about it, also because it's not really being explained in newspapers, media, but also school institutions and so on. Yeah. And the data there helps because you can really show the numbers, right? And that has to do with documentary form. And before the other artists were talking about this idea of documentary and fiction. In this case, well, photography can be both. In some cases, it's documentary. In some cases, no. In my case, I use data-based work, actually with photography or images, if you want. And that is a sort of medium, or maybe cross-medium between photography, data, and then I combine everything, because actually data is also meant to be combined to create new realities, or actually shows new realities that were hidden in the complexity of the big data. And when we are talking about these ecosystems and species, it is big data. It is around 1,000 millions. Actually, we don't even have the exact number yet of species in this world or ecosystems.
So working in these spaces between art and law, do you believe legal frameworks can be ever poetic? And do you think that your work, Climate Tribunal model, actually could move beyond symbolic art and move into the real world legal practice?
Yes, I think law can be a material for artists, and actually we are seeing this as much as the economy, as much as biology. These are maybe more scientific fields, but also somehow there are also social fields that can be investigated by artists and can also be used and reshaped or imagined. So definitely the law is a material for artists. And then yes, they can produce change, although it's very hard for an artist claiming that they can produce change, but definitely they can inspire changes. And that happened, at least to me, as an activist or an artist. Maybe I don't have the direct connection between a new regulation, a new change, but definitely I can tell that I was part of a larger group of organizations, activists around the world or in Europe that together we lobbied, we tried to push for something like that. And in fact, in Europe, particularly in Europe, we have way stronger regulations around environment or climate change. I mean, compared to the US in these days, for instance, they're trying to slash everything. And that's the result of people, activists, artists working together and try to push a certain agenda, right? So yeah, it does produce change.
So then what do you think that the role artists should or should not have in this in this place, in these questions of ecological discourse and activism? Like, you know, it's very blurry, you know, and like, so what do you think about this? Maybe Sheng, you can jump in between.
That's a very central question for us, I think. For me, the artists, or perhaps art and literature, perhaps can approach or sometimes answer one question, one very difficult question for scientists or other academia. I think the question is, why does that concern me? I think we know that maybe science and academia, they are very good at writing papers and also very good at doing research, maybe excavating some interesting facts out of the chaos we are in right now. But it's very difficult to address this question. Why does that concern me? And I believe that perhaps art and literature have a possibility to smuggle some questions into people's mind, and perhaps it may grow in people's mind and maybe turn into something that unexpected, I think. And on the other hand, I think that what art and literature maybe should not be. I think that art and literature should not just be a mediator of science, or it shouldn't be just a creative version of an academic paper or a translation of some academic project. And it should not, I think it should not establish a belief system. I mean, a lot of people right now believe in science, right? We believe in ecology, we believe in computer science, AI. We believe a lot of things that scientists tell us. But actually, that's kind of misunderstanding what science really is. Science is not a pursuit of truth. Science is actually a transmission of doubt. So I think art should also perhaps be a transmission of doubt. It should not establish a belief system telling us that what we should believe, because once we establish a belief system in our mind, it is very difficult to disintegrate it and believe something else. So I think perhaps art should facilitate discussion rather than drive us into a certain set of conclusion, because we are in a dynamic world. If there are conclusions, I think we should discuss it rather than just trust anything or everything.
Thank you. Very powerful. Anything to add?
Yeah, no, it's totally true. In fact, in climate change, what you see that there is a sort of aesthetic, there is a certain push to represent it in a certain way. And it's quite interesting to see some exhibitions, sometime, or some curators or some academics that represent climate change in a certain way that's actually disinformation. And that's pure propaganda. Maybe use fiction, maybe use documentary, but it's kind of like, you know, they are doing it as also to please the founders, producing greenwashing, right? And greenwashing per se is something, but actually what is communicated to the audience gives the idea, representation of something that is not also good, right? Because it's a belief system and it's pure propaganda. So in a certain way, there is also that problem to add.
Yeah, speaking about that, I would like to talk about accountability and risk when you are doing this kind of job, activistic or artistic. Especially today, we are witnessing that many artists have been vocal about specific political and social topics and been jailed, arrested, or deported from their countries. Paolo, you actually publicly exposed the logos of all these big companies, burned them with the oil. Have you ever received any threats or being legally received any pushbacks, and how you're dealing with that? Please share with us.
With oil companies, not, but I received a lot of threats in the past for other projects. Oil companies, they do threat activists a lot, actually. In Europe, not, is more rare, but in Netherlands, it did happen that they pushed back a lot on the activists. In Italy, it happens a lot, but more also on the street activists, if you want. As an artist and activist, with the oil companies, rare that they would do something against you, but also really depends where. In the US right now, it's not safe. It wouldn't be safe for me, for instance. But yeah, of course, they have a very particular agenda. They are very aggressive. They would use all their power they have. And actually, all these efforts for climate justice and making them accountable, even when they were successful, they appealed and they won the case again because they have such powerful lawyers. And actually, in the Netherlands, it's really the case. They were very successful trials, and the activists won. And then Shell and BP and so on, they pushed a lot, and they appealed, and everything was reversed. And actually, this is happening also in the terms of greenwashing, which is very sad. For instance, in the most known case is probably Tate in London. For 10, 20 years, art and activists were trying to push out BP, the British Petroleum Company, out of Tate as sponsorship. And actually, they succeed. And now, after Trump, they reversed completely the policies. And this was the Tate, the museum, doing it. And that also shows you the connection here that we have. It's not just oil companies, it's not just the state, it's not just the museums, but actually it's a power system that's all connected also to cultural values, but after all, very specific interests that are all in line in a way. And that you see that at Tate, but to be honest, you can see it in Turin, you can see it all over the world. In some cases, you cannot even discuss about it. Look at Russia or China. There's no way you can say, oh, Gazprom should go to trial, right? Actually, because Gazprom is the one behind Putin himself, or himself is Gazprom in a way. Seeing reality and showing reality, I mean, an artist, I think, has a responsibility in a way to show all these complexities together in a way. And then, yes, they also have to take the fact that it's a risk to tell the truth. And sometimes, I also have to defend myself, not actually against the oil companies, but maybe against curators that say, oh, but this is not true. I have another opinion. But what is an opinion in these days? You also need to know and put all these things together.
Thank you. Sheng, same question for you about this risk accountability, you remember?
Oh, I think Paolo addressed one end very, very well. I want to maybe address another unexpected end of this accountability and risk. I actually get some, maybe not a lot, but some maybe complaints from animal rights activists. Sometimes they call me and my collaborators a hypocrite or cruel artists trying to engage nature. Maybe we don't have time for the details, but maybe some animal rights activists, they will totally oppose the idea of zoos, and they want to abolish the zoos altogether, which actually myself, I do not quite agree with that. And maybe there are activists, animal rights activists, they are against my project when I was trying to make an eco-observation project in Barcelona. There will be like people pointing fingers at me, telling, oh, why should you disturb nature? You should let it be, and please do not go to the river and observe the animals inside the river. Please let them be. And you are cruel, and what you did is terrible. So I get, I sometimes get responses, very interesting responses from activists from the other side, and I think that is a good sign, because people are more aware of what's going on around us, and people try to do good to the environment, and people have their own standard on our relationship between the ecosystem and human. But I think perhaps we should take a step back and ask, are we currently in a societal state that can do without nature observation? Or are we currently in a societal state that can do totally without zoos? I think that is a question that we can ask very deeply. In the case of zoos, we can ask the question, where does the money of conservation currently came from? I think in a perfect world where people are actively donating money to conservation programs every day, every year, there can be less zoos in the world, or far less than what we have, which is like maybe we have more than 10,000 zoos across the globe. But we are not in that societal state yet. We are in a societal state that we are indifferent to nature conservation. Who donate money to conservation programs among the audience? I don't know. But for zoos, a lot of ticket sale money actually goes to conservation programs. And in our current societal states, that is one of the major funding sources of conservation programs around the world. So by eliminating the zoo altogether in our current world, including I must say there are very good zoos who take good care of animals, I don't think it's a beneficial idea, at least at our current stage in the world. But that is, of course, opens up to debates.
Yeah, this is our current state where we live in, but I hope you will allow me to talk a little bit about imagining other futures, worse or better. So if art can be a speculative tool, how do you imagine your work impacts our relationship with non-humans and other systems? Or moreover, if you can choose to work with any other possible non-human species like plant, animal, river, algorithm, non-human intelligence, what it would be and why? Just to mention here the current debate about this wolf that artists brought to the life with the DNA and genome from 10,000 years ago. I would like to hear also your thoughts about that. Would you like to start?
Well, yes, interesting, but I think it's also a question of scale, actually, it's a matter of scale. It's good to remember that humans have been around only in the past 500,000 years. 500,000 years for the planet is a second. I mean, enjoy your life, because your life is a fraction of a second. And that also, it's good to keep in mind, this is the 6th extinction we are going through. I mean, that means there have been already 5 before this one, caused by many other reasons, not by humans, by the way, because they were not around. You can read the history of that. This is the first one that's caused by humans. But actually humans are nothing anyway, because we have been around for so little. So why the planet would care about us? You know, I would reverse almost the question in a way. Yes, we do care about the planet, and that's actually the only thing I find interesting in this story. The fact that, yes, humans have the conscience and have this thinking, and they process, and we are the only species around that have this capacity, and eventually also have the capacity to control and bring back species that are extinct. But nevertheless, we are nothing, compared to the history of planet and the history of nature and species evolution. And we just do these little experiments, and we're probably going to keep doing it, but we might disappear, anytime, and we're probably going to do.
So with who would you like to collaborate in imaginative future?
Yeah, I think it's an incredible opportunity for our species to have this imagination and to reflect and have a philosophy. I mean, if you think about even philosophy itself is 300 years old. If we start from the Greek, of course, let's say 3,000 years ago. But there's nothing really. Look at the timeline, and we are very like a blip on the planet and nothing in the universe, of course, because then if you expand, but it's also interesting how nature keeps evolving. So we might disappear, all the species might disappear, and then in 3 million of years from now, a completely different type of nature will be around. Similar, but the DNA is going to evolve as the DNA is going to adapt. It's already adapting now, right? So we have to keep that in mind. And but at the same time, it's very interesting that humans have this sense of empathy, and we have grief. And it's grief for the human species, but then also have this empathy toward the rest. There's a very specific thing about our species. And to the point that also we want to control nature and so on. So this is my thoughts. Just
Thank
some
you, Paolo.
scientific notes.
Sheng, what is your take on this philosophical topic?
Let me address the direwolf first, because as many of you know, there's a scientific team trying to bring back a direwolf, and reportedly, or they think that they successfully bring back the direwolf, which went extinct a long time ago. Maybe we don't debate on whether they really brought back the direwolf or not, but let's think about the fact that why should we bring back the direwolf, and have we really bring back direwolf in a sense that they can live in this world? Or just inside the laboratory. I think that's the same as the polar bear case, actually. In polar bears in the zoos, maybe many people will imagine that, they are breeding the bears inside the zoo, so we can rehabilitate them to the wild when they are going to extinct. But no, that is not a fact. In fact, doing so is illegal, because the problem for polar bear right now is habitat loss in the wild. And to put a polar bear back to a lost habitat is irresponsible. In fact, it's against IUCN regulations, and that makes it illegal. So right now, there are no rehabilitation programs for polar bears around the world. The same, of course, goes to direwolf. There are no suitable habitats right now for direwolf, and even if there are, we don't know the consequences of putting the direwolf back into the ecosystem. What will the other species respond to this scenario? We don't really know. So that, I think the direwolf situation is kind of like a parallel to the polar bear situation. And second of all, what are we projecting when we said that we can bring extinct animals back to the world? We know that right now there's a lot of endeavors like geoengineering, trying to transform the planet to save climate change. That is, to me, that is a two-sided sword as well. In one end, perhaps this science can benefit conservation when it is done right, but it may also project another image saying that we don't have to care right now if something goes extinct. We just bring them back. Maybe when a narrative is directed that way, maybe I don't think it's a good idea at all. and maybe speculative-wise, what can art do for us in the future. I have this dream that perhaps art and literature or other creative endeavors, perhaps there's a chance to thinner our comfort zone. I mean, we as humans, genetically, I think it's genetic, we have a very thick comfort zone. We have a very, it's very difficult for us to change our habit. Once we stick to a routine, it is really difficult for us to imagine the otherwise. I imagine if there is a high-level civilization in the universe, perhaps an alien in the universe with higher civilization status than human, I speculate that that species, that alien species, should have a much thinner comfort zone, meaning that they can adapt to change, they can change their routines easier than human. I hope that perhaps in the future, or what we are doing right now, perhaps art and literature can kind of transform human in a direction that we are more willing to change. I think that's what I speculate and hope that art and literature can do.
Wow. Thank you both for your insights, amazing thoughts, your meaningful work, your provocations. I think we learned so much today in this short discussion. Therefore, I would like to open the space for the questions from our audience. I believe there are some. No? Okay, then I would like to close this discussion. Invite you all, if you didn't see, to saw the exhibitions of both of these great artists. Thank you all. Thanks for the translation. And see you later. Bye.
Thank you.